Next on Currents News, the Mass of Hope and Healing for Sexual Abuse Survivors. Brooklyn Bishop Nicholas DiMarzio celebrating the liturgy. The homilist himself has endured abuse. More violence today in Venezuela as top U.S. officials accuse Russia for keeping Nicolas Maduro in power.
It's the most important book ever published. I'm Emily Drubia, and coming up, I'll show you where to find some of the rarest editions.
Plus, U.S. Attorney General Bill Barr takes on the Senate over the Mueller report. The news starts right now. Good evening, I'm Michelle Powers. Liz Faultless is off. Bishop DiMarzio prayed for survivor victims of sexual abuse during a powerful celebration of the faith last night at St. Athanasius Church in Bensonhurst, attended by hundreds. The service offering hope and healing to those who've endured unspeakable evil. Currents News' Tim Harfman was there.
The 5th Annual Mass of Hope and Healing, a liturgy planned by survivors for survivors. Addressing the gathering as homilist was a survivor himself, Father Jeffrey Dillon.
I am here to say, I am Jeffrey, and I am a survivor of priest sexual abuse.
Father Dillon was abused when he was a Catholic school student in the late 1950s and early 1960s. The people who organized the Mass, the Brooklyn Diocese Survivors Advisory Committee, selected him to speak. Father Dillon is pastor of Our Lady of Light Parish in St. Albans, Queens. He said last night that the struggle to overcome the evil impact of abuse never ends.
It is not over for the victims' survivors. They have to cope every day of their lives with the devastation that they have endured.
Brooklyn's Bishop Nicholas DiMarzio celebrated the Hope and Healing Mass.
It's always a night that's moving because you know there are victims there, not identified, and they come with great faith and looking for healing and support from the community.
He was assisted in concelebrating the liturgy by all the auxiliary bishops of the diocese, along with dozens of priests and deacons. In attendance, Jasmine Salazar, who is the diocese vice chancellor and victims assistance coordinator. She says the Mass drew people from Brooklyn, Queens, and beyond, and those Catholics from elsewhere were impressed with the outreach of the Brooklyn Diocese in offering hope and healing.
The ones that were from other dioceses mentioned, I haven't had a priest that has even reached out to me. They were moved, like, oh, okay, like, the priests do care, the bishops are involved, like, there is interest in this.
Brooklyn deacon Phil Franco was abused when he was a teenager. He said what the diocese is doing is a big help for survivors to overcome a natural fear.
At one point or another, every victim was afraid to come forward. They was afraid who would say what. They were afraid who would believe them. And then when you see a church filled with hundreds of people, priests, deacons, faithful, it's an affirmation that you're not alone, and the church is truly a communion. It's truly one.
Father Dillon said that Christ shows the way forward by listening to Jesus.
He always began by asking, what is it that you would like me to do? What the survivors would like is for the leaders to listen to them.
And before the Mass, survivors lit the Easter candle and prayed for abuse victims who died in the last year. Michelle?
Tim, that was a powerful homily from Father Dillon. Did other survivors know that he was a victim?
Most of them didn't, nor did the majority of priests and deacons from the Brooklyn Diocese. Father Dillon told me before Mass that he announced it to some of his Queens parishioners a few months ago, but for the most part, last night was the first chance for him to publicly reveal what happened to him.
Thank you for that, Tim. More violence today in Venezuela, one of the world's most Catholic countries. Tear gas fired at anti-government Venezuelan protesters this afternoon as strongman Nicolas Maduro shows no signs of giving up power. Thousands filled the street of Caracas and police started lobbing tear gas canisters at them. At the hour of this recording, there is no word about injuries or arrests. Yesterday, self-declared President Juan Guaido had urged the military to rise up and force Maduro to go. Now top U.S. officials are claiming Maduro was ready to leave for Cuba. Then the Russians got involved. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo.
As we understand it, and the Russians indicated he should stay. We think the situation remains incredibly fluid. We know that there were senior leaders inside the Maduro government that were prepared to leave.
We've made it clear to the Russians in a lot of conversations at a lot of different levels, some of which are going to continue today, why we think this behavior is unacceptable to us.
Both Bolton and Pompeo are saying they are very confident that Maduro will be gone from Venezuela soon. Russia is one of the strongest supporters of Maduro. Fred Plankton is reporting from Moscow that the Kremlin is admitting it has soldiers stationed in Venezuela.
The Russians claim that those troops are only technical personnel, a lot of them there for maintenance for some of the weapons systems that the Maduro government has acquired from the Russian Federation. Some of them apparently also trainers to train Venezuelan personnel how to use those weapons systems. The Russians are saying that the forces that they have on the ground will absolutely not get involved in the situation that is unfolding in Venezuela right now. We do know that the Russian government was briefed at the highest levels. The spokesman for the Kremlin, Dmitry Peskov, coming out on Tuesday and saying that Vladimir Putin had been briefed in a National Security Council meeting here in Russia, and that the whole complex of what's going on in Venezuela took up a large proportion of that time.
Plankton also reports that for now the Russians are blaming the Venezuelan opposition for inciting violence in the country. Joe Biden is speaking out on the Venezuelan crisis. The front-running Democrat presidential candidate said he believed that Juan Guaido's call for a military uprising has fallen short.
I think the anticipation that there was going to be a military rise up has been slightly underestimated. And I think what we have to continue to do is make it real clear. It's ridiculous talking about foreign policy and ice cream right now. But I think that it's very important we stay calm here.
Biden said it is important for the international community to demand that free elections are held in Venezuela. A new poll on U.S. presidential election shows Joe Biden is surging among Democrat contenders. He has 38% support in a new Quinnipiac survey. At 12%, Senator Elizabeth Warren is in second place, and 11% are backing Senator Bernie Sanders. The latest now on immigration, sure to be a big issue in the campaign. Border Patrol is reporting that more than 600 people have been apprehended crossing into New Mexico. The group was comprised primarily of Central American families and unaccompanied juveniles. Border Patrol described the crossers as illegal aliens in a news release. It's not clear whether they were seeking asylum in the United States. The hot-button story on Capitol Hill all day, U.S. Attorney General Bill Barr taking on the Senate Judiciary Committee over the Mueller report. His testimony came as Democrats and Republicans clashed. Omar Jimenez reports the latest.
Contention on Capitol Hill as Democrats denounce Attorney General Bill Barr's handling of the Russia investigation.
You lied to Congress.
Minutes before Barr's testimony, the Justice Department released a March letter from Special Counsel Robert Mueller. In it, Mueller says Barr's summary of the investigation and conclusion the president did not obstruct justice, quote, did not fully capture the context, nature, and substance of this office's work and conclusions.
I decided to simply state what the bottom line conclusions were. Is there a crime or isn't there a crime?
Was there an underlying crime here?
No.
Democrats pounced.
If you received a letter from Bob Mueller a few days after your March 24th letter, it was clear he had some genuine concerns about what you had said and done to that point.
Yeah, his concerns was he wanted more ads. I'm not trying to capture everything. I'm just trying to state the verdict.
2016.
Republicans say the focus shouldn't be on Barr or the president, but on protecting future elections.
My takeaway from this report is that we've got a lot of work to do to defend democracy against the Russians and other bad actors.
On Capitol Hill, Omar Jimenez, Currents News.
An update tonight on another college campus shooting. 2 people are dead and at least 4 others are injured after a gunman opened fire on the University of North Carolina at Charlotte campus. Just before 6 p.m. Tuesday, the campus went on lockdown after shots were fired, police swarming the area. The suspect has been identified as 22-year-old Tristan Terrell. He has been charged with 2 counts of murder and 4 counts of attempted murder. Students reacted to the tragedy.
I remember it was hearing 3 shots, just 3 shots, and I went down.
We mourn the loss of life. We pray for those who are being treated at the hospital.
It remains unclear whether the suspect is a student at the school, and authorities are investigating a motive. Prosecutors in California are saying the San Diego synagogue shooter could face the death penalty. Reed Binion reports on what the San Diego district attorney is saying about the suspect.
He had terror on his mind.
Synagogue shooting suspect 19-year-old John Earnest showing no remorse, facing a judge for the first time, according to the district attorney. His court-appointed attorney entered a not guilty plea on his behalf. He's accused of Saturday's deadly shooting at the Chabad of Poway Synagogue, where 60-year-old Lori Kay was killed and 3 others were wounded, including an 8-year-old girl.
The defendant expressed his intent to harm Jews.
Earnest is being charged with 1 count of murder, 3 counts of attempted murder, and 1 count of arson from a separate incident.
When the target of violence is an entire religion, race, ethnicity, or sexual orientation, the victim pool becomes very large.
The murder charges come with hate crime allegations, which could mean harsher penalties if Earnest is convicted. And because he's accused of killing a woman due to her religious beliefs, he could face the death penalty.
Saturday's shooting devastated the heart of San Diego County. It has galvanized our spirit to stand against hate and to hold those who hate accountable.
I'm Reed Binion reporting.
Reacting to the violence that seems to be engulfing the globe, Pope Francis said this morning that Satan is very real. The Holy Father reminding thousands of pilgrims that even Jesus confronted the devil's temptations. Francis said the way to be victorious over Satan is with God the Father.
Nei momenti più brutti della nostra vita, nei momenti più sofferenti, nei momenti più angoscianti, Dio veglia con noi, Dio lotta con noi, sempre vicino a noi. Perché? Perché Padre.
Francis added that the reason we begin the Lord's Prayer with Our Father is because a father does not abandon his children. The pontiff marked today's feast of St. Joseph the Worker with special prayers for the unemployed, as it is also International Labor Day. The Holy Father calling the lack of employment in many parts of the world a global tragedy. And on this May Day, French authorities fired tear gas at crowds in Paris. Thousands took to the streets for the city's annual May Day protest, calling for better workplace conditions. Over 7,000 police and security forces were deployed across the city. There's a lot more news headed your way. It is the most important book the world has ever known. Coming up, the rarest of Bibles and their American roots. More on the violence in Venezuela and its Cuban connection. Why a man is carrying a cross from town to town in the United States. Do you have a story idea or want to share a tip? Email us at newstips@desalesmedia.org or call our 24-hour number, 718-517-3122. We'll be right back. A new exhibit displaying the Bibles that made history in America is now underway. It's called In God We Trust, and some of the Bibles have never been seen before. Currents News' Emily Druby reports.
A treasure of biblical proportions on display for the first time. Hidden inside the New York Historical Society, the Word of God, just steps from the lobby. The incredible collection of historical Bibles and religious texts is called In God We Trust. It seeks to show that faith has always been the cornerstone of life in America.
So you have the Indian Bible, you have the German Bibles, you have the Catholic Bible.
The Museum and Library's Vice President Michael Ryan says while the Bibles are in different languages, they do have one thing in common. They're all original printings of their type.
For the people who come to this exhibit, this is the only time they're going to see this book.
Like the first Bible printed in America back in the 1600s, just 40 years after the Pilgrims stepped off the Mayflower.
First Bible printed in America is in Algonquian, the language of the Natick Indian tribes.
Each tells a special story, one not found within their pages.
People should see this to just appreciate the ways in which Bibles tell stories other than the stories that are in the Bible text. So these books, just by the virtue of their existing, tell a story. Their printing, their dissemination, who they're made for, etc.
Pieces that help write America's story, like President Grant's original inauguration Bible and the first translated by a woman.
A nation of immigrants, speaking many languages, but sharing a common set of values and commitments. And it also underscores the most obvious point, and that is the centrality of the Bible in public rituals in the United States.
In God We Trust will be on display until July 28th on the Upper West Side. Emily Druby, Currents News.
As most Catholic churches remain closed across Sri Lanka, one parish in a small village is celebrating the ordination of a new priest. It was the first public mass held in the country since the Easter Sunday church bombings. Ever since the terrorists struck, worship services have been suspended in Sri Lanka. More than 250 people died in the attacks. For the ordination mass, hundreds of troops checked each attendee before they entered the church. Sri Lankans are now able to sign into social media for the first time in over a week. The government issued the nationwide ban after the deadly bombings in an effort to prevent false news reports. Officials temporarily blocked Facebook and other platforms last year, saying they were being used to incite violence. More now on the crisis in Venezuela. President Trump is threatening Cuba with a full embargo and more sanctions, tweeting if Cuban troops and militia do not immediately cease military and other operations for the purpose of causing death and destruction to the Constitution of Venezuela, a full and complete embargo, together with the highest level sanctions, will be placed on the island of Cuba. Threats from the U.S. aren't new for many Cubans. Veterans of the Bay of Pigs invasion say the country will prevail despite pressure from the Trump administration. Patrick Ottman reports from Cuba.
In 1961, afraid that the newly installed government of Fidel Castro was siding with the Soviet Union in the Cold War, the U.S. sent a secret force of over 1,000 anti-Castro Cubans to take back the island. The CIA disguised some of the invaders to make them seem like rebelling Cuban troops. Unlike a long list of U.S. coups elsewhere in Latin America, the Bay of Pigs invasion failed. The planes were shooting up the road, he tells me, everything they saw. They were painted like Cuban planes, but it was a lie. The Trump administration has implemented the toughest sanctions on Cuba in decades. National Security Advisor John Bolton in April told a gathering of Cuban exiles that fought on the U.S. side of the Bay of Pigs that the administration would place more restrictions on Cuban Americans sending money to relatives on the island and on Americans visiting Cuba, all with the hope of depriving the Cuban government of badly needed hard currency.
We have a responsibility to tell the truth about the dangers of these evil collectivist ideologies, the immense human suffering they cause, and the perils of their spread. Together, we can finish what began on those beaches.
U.S. and Cuban relations were supposed to be on the mend, following then-President Obama's historic visit to the communist-run island, where he said it was time to move on from the bitter past of conflicts like the Bay of Pigs invasion. The Cuban soldiers here are old now, but still defiant. If they come again, they will be defeated, he tells me. Cuba has to be respected. For these veterans of a long war that neither side fully won, history is now repeating itself. Patrick Ottman, the Bay of Pigs, Cuba.
A United States religious freedom body wants China sanctioned for human rights abuses. China is singled out in a newly released report by the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. The communist nation is blamed for its attacks on religious believers, particularly Christians and Muslims. Clocking in at more than 200 pages, the report called for greater action, both from the United States and the international community, in pursuing more protections for people of faith. Still to come on Current News, he endured Soviet persecution. Now, the first bishop in a nation's history is on track to make church history. Plus, a man on a mission and some of the miraculous things he's witnessed. And the tablet has a brand new page called Our Diocesan Family, where you can share your pictures of recent baptisms, Holy Communions, confirmations, marriage, all of the joyous sacraments. For more details and to submit your photos, go to thetablet.org/Our Diocesan Family. Your picture may be published in an upcoming issue of the newspaper. We'll be right back. A top leader with the U.S. Bishops' Conference has a new job. Bishop Oscar Cantu was one of the delegates chosen to represent the USCCB when Pope Francis visited Mexico in 2016. He is now taking over as the leader of the Diocese of San Jose, California. He replaces Bishop Patrick McGrath, who had been in charge of San Jose for over 20 years. Another bishop is on a path to make history. He confronted Soviet persecution at the height of the Cold War when he was his nation's first bishop ever. Now he could become the country's first saint. Melissa Butts reports from St. Peter's Square.
Estonia could soon be getting their first blessed and potential saint, Archbishop Edward Profittli. He's Estonia's first bishop from 1936 to 1942. After him, the Estonian Catholic Church faced 65 years without a bishop. The current apostolic administrator of Estonia, Philippe Jordan, is the second bishop of the country. He shares why Bishop Profittli is worthy of sainthood and important, especially for Estonians during the Soviet occupation. He was one of the many who were arrested and carried to Russia, where they faced their imminent death.
He died in the Soviet jails, so he gave his life really for the faith. And he asked to the Pope if he should leave or stay. The Pope said to him, do what you consider the better for your people. And so he decided to stay.
The Estonian Catholic Press representative has been collecting material and testimonies on the bishop for a couple years now. She came to Rome to bring the Congregation for the Causes of Saints all the materials that she's found.
Now they start to discover and research and study all the documents what we have delivered, and it will take approximately 6 months when we will get the feedback.
In the meantime, she says having the first saint in Estonia would mean the world to the Baltic country.
It is our cultural memory, and it is extremely important. And I'm glad to say even today that lots of people have been prayed for his intercession.
Pope Francis visited the first bishop's tomb and memorial during his trip to the country. It was a special moment for them, and one they're hoping is just the beginning step to getting their first recognized saint in the Catholic Church. In Rome, Melissa Butts, Currents News.
One man is on a mission to go cross-country while carrying the cross of Christ and spreading a special message.
Pray and be ready for the coming of Christ.
That is 34-year-old A.C. Burleson from South Carolina. He's been traveling from town to town since early March. He packed light, just his hand-built cross and a small tent, and is hoping to reach the Grand Canyon in 3 months. He explained why he is making the over 2,000-mile journey.
But it's all to spread Him. It's all about Him. Everything else is junk. Everything else is junk. It's all about Him.
Burleson says he's met a lot of generous people and churches who have helped him on his journey, and he's even had a few miracle stories, including a woman who reconsidered suicide after seeing his act for God. That is Currents News. I'm Michelle Powers. Thank you for joining us because we are putting your faith in the news. Hope to see you again next time.